How you doing? I'm Kenny Joya. Welcome to another one of my tutorials. In this tutorial, I want to show you how to use the batch file item converter in Reaper. We go over here. This is the batch file item converter, and it's used for converting files, or converting files to different types, or creating files out of media items. For instance, we have some drum samples here, some piano samples here, and some effects. We could separate these into different items and then export them as separate files, using the batch file item converter and changing them to any file type that we want. Now, one of the nice things about this feature, if we open it up again, we don't have to use audio that's in Reaper. We could use this feature with external files on our hard drive and just convert them and make copies. We don't actually have to bring the files into Reaper. We can go to Add and choose Add Files and choose them from our directory or our Finder. But to make it easier, in this tutorial, we're going to use files that are in Reaper, like these ones here. So I have some drum samples. Let's cut them up or split them so we can export them as separate files. Now I'm doing this really quickly, so it's not really fine-tuned. So now we could select these items, these drum samples, open this back up, and let's go through the parameters. The first thing we want to do is add them. So instead of choosing Add Files, we'll choose Add Selected Media Items. So it's going to add what we just selected. And they show up right here. These are the names of the items, and this is where it's being outputted to. Now if this is checked right here, Use Source File Directory, it's going to put the files in the file directory that this project is using. But if we don't want to do that, unselect it, and we could choose it right here. Choose Browse, and I'm going to put them all in a folder here called Converted Files. So that's where all these files are going to be exported to, or converted to. Now besides adding the files, we can remove them one at a time, right here, or clear it with this button here. Let's add them back in. And now let's name the outputted files. Now if we put in a name like new drums, it still has to separate them because there's more than one. So a better thing to do is use some wildcards. So it'll rename the file based on some of these variables right here. Like item name, puts the item name right there. Or item number, make this bigger, puts the number right there. But let's change the name of these based on their sound. In this case, they're hip hop drums. So let's change this to hip hop drums, and they're named accordingly. Next, we have the options down here of how the file is going to be exported. Under sample rate, we can choose all the usual sample rates, like 44.1, 48, or 192. But if you don't want to change the sample rate, we could choose source, which is going to keep the sample rate of the original file. Whatever the sample rate of the original audio, it's going to stay the same. But let's change this to 44.1, and then we could choose the channels. We could choose mono, stereo, or multi-channel. But again, we have the option here to choose source. So if the file is mono, stereo, or multi-channel, it'll stay the same. But let's force it to be stereo. Now if the sample rate's being changed over here, we could choose the resample mode. From good quality all the way up to extreme quality. Let's choose extreme. The next option is pretty unique. We have the ability here to add effects to the audio before it's exported. So we could choose this, and we could add some EQ right over here. We could filter out the lows using a high pass and roll off the low end. We can make them brighter by adding some top end EQ. We could add things like compression right here. Bring down a threshold, adjust the attack and release, and compress the sound that's being exported. Another one of my favorites is the Reefer Plugin. This will create noise reduction by allowing us to sample the noise, like an air conditioner or hum. We can use this plugin to remove that, so all the exports will be cleaner with less noise. Let's remove these. And we can turn this off. But before we turn this off, there's another option over here. Tail size in milliseconds. This is important if we add an effect like a delay. Right here. Or a reverb. Right here. When we use those effects, they're going to hang over and be longer than the original file. So if we keep the tail size at 0, our samples or audio files are going to be cut off at the end, cutting off that reverb or delay. So if you're adding those kind of effects that hang over, add a few seconds over here. But we're not using effects, so we'll turn that off. And over here, we can add dither or noise shaping. Next, we could choose the output format. We could do AAF files, WAV files, MP3s, or a bunch more. Let's choose WAV files, and the WAV bit depth will make 24-bit. Now we can convert the files, and they're going to look like this. Let's hit convert. It converted 9 files. Hit open to open the directory, and this is what we outputted. Hip hop drums 1 through 9. Let's delete this. Let's clear this. And let's check out another option, the piano samples. We'll cut this up as well. We'll select them and do the same thing. Batch file item converter. Add selected media items, and they show up. But for this one, I want to change the tags, or the wildcards. Because they're piano samples, it's actually multi-sampled at different pitches. So we can add the wildcard item, and then add the option over here, note. Let's make this bigger. Now the notes that are being chosen are half steps, C, C sharp, but I actually used whole notes. So instead of choosing note, let's choose natural. And that'll jump to whole steps, C, D, E, which is what I sampled. Let's make these stereo. 192. And change this to AAF files, because I'm using a certain sampler that prefers this. I'll do 16-bit, and we can convert this. It made 8 files. Hit open. It opens the directory, and here are the files. So I could drag these samples right into my sampler and map it out to be played. So it's a pretty powerful feature. And one other thing I should show you is over here, we have presets. We could save presets based on what we want to do. Like for this, we could save it as exporting piano samples. And now if this gets changed to 44.1, mono, and waves, if we need to put it back, go to the preset, choose it, and everything changes to how we set it up the first time. Now I should note, if we go to our render, this area over here, options and output format, is pretty much identical. So when you go to the presets here, for options and format, the preset shows up there because it's the same settings. So we can bounce back and forth between the options and format of the render dialog and the batch file item converter. So we can choose it here, and it changes it over here. And if we save something in the render window, like 44.1, mono, and MP3. Let's save it as mono MP3. We can go back to the batch file item converter and it'll show up right here. And those settings will change to a mono MP3. So they share the same presets. So that's pretty much it. That's the batch file item converter in Reaper. And as you can see, it's a very powerful feature. So it's a great way of converting files from one type to another, or converting items into separate files to be exported. So that's the batch file item converter in Reaper. I thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.